This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
We got a call from the bank and said, "Are you aware that there's no funds in this account?"
A string of victims across the US, stretching from coast to coast.
The amount of victims in such a short time was unbelievable.
Real people losing real money, but the criminals are ghosts.
The anger, the frustration, the fear.
From the BBC World Service, this is Evil Core.
The story of a cybercrime case that stretches from small-town America to the backstreets of Moscow.
Listen now. Search for Cyberhack wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello and welcome to The History Hour from the BBC World Service with me, Max Pearson. The past brought to life by those who were there. This week, all our stories come from Indonesia, marking 80 years since independence. We'll be looking at that independence movement when Dutch rule was brought to an end in the middle of the last century. Also, East Timor's struggle for independence from Indonesia. Plus, the restoration of the world's largest Buddhist monument. We also look at Jakarta's ban on the use of dancing monkeys.
This is where you can really see an individual that was really broken, stressed. Yeah, you can just read in its eyes the fear and the trauma that it's been through.
And the small skeletal remains discovered on an Indonesian island that came to be known as the Hobbit.
Homo erectus, this large-bodied human relative, had somehow got to Flores. Could not have walked, had to have used watercraft too far to swim, and through time its body size had reduced.
But first, a writer who has come to symbolise Indonesia's resistance to oppression. Pramoedya Anantathur's life and work spanned the years covering the end of Dutch colonial rule and the anti-communist right-wing dictatorship of President Suharto. Being a writer with communist leanings, he suffered under both. In 1969, he was jailed without trial and spent 10 years on a brutal prison island. Jill Kersley has been learning more about his remarkable life and work.
Ya, saya menghendaki plafon budaya naik.
I want the cultural ceiling to rise as opposed to fall, and for humanism to be understood better, to gain a better understanding of justice and truth. That's why, for me, writing is not only a personal endeavor, but a national one too. I don't write works for entertainment.
Those are the words of Pramoedya Anantathur. As this programme is made from BBC Archive over the years, you'll hear different voices reading his words, but the message remains just as powerful and distinctly his. Pramoedya, also known as Pram, was born on the island of Java, which was then a Dutch colony. He was a nationalist who wrote about the injustices of Dutch rule of his country.
Indonesia tidak terdidik demokratis. Itu di Indonesia sudah.
Indonesia has had no democratic education. In Indonesia, there's a deeply rooted feudal tradition. A lot of Indonesian thinkers have got into trouble with authority. It's tradition. And because of this, there is no real history written by Indonesians, except in the form of folk tales. In the struggle against Dutch imperialism, against that tiny little country of Holland, Indonesia never won a victory. But in the feudal folk tales, the local people always beat the Dutch. Our problem really is fear in the face of authority. We've always been brought up to be frightened of power.
Pramoedya had communist links, although he wasn't a member of the party. He was imprisoned for his political beliefs and writing under both Dutch colonial rule and then President Sukarno's nationalist government. After the 1965 military coup that brought General Suharto to power, he was arrested again and moved between prisons. In 1969, he was transported by a military ship to Buru Island, a notorious penal colony near the Spice Islands. He later recounted this journey in his 1999 memoir, The Mute Soliloquy.
Like our distant ancestors in the age of migration, we are on a voyage of discovery, a journey toward a new land and life. Only our education gives us the knowledge that we are passing through the waters of our own country, a maritime nation of more than 13,000 islands. But the lesson that now seems more real, more easy to comprehend, is the one that was drilled into us by the chief warrant officer of Salemba prison. The only right you have is to breathe.
Buru Island in East Indonesia was once home to 12,000 political prisoners, suspected communist sympathisers, sent here during the rule of President Suharto. It became known as the Prison Island. It was where people were detained without charge. Prisoners were forced to do hard labour, clearing the jungle with simple tools to make roads and farms. After getting off the ship, Pramodia was placed in Unit 3, the unit furthest away from the coast. Writing was forbidden, and even correspondence with family was restricted. Despite this, he found a way to keep storytelling alive.
Yes, it originated in Buru, but the raw materials I had been gathering together before I was arrested and exiled. To start with, I told the stories orally, because as the regime there became harsher, my friends, the political prisoners, began to go downhill mentally. So I started telling stories. The ideas were there already, but seeing the mental collapse of my friends, I had to build them up again. So that was how the stories I told and wrote in Buru were born. And they were passed on to other units, by word of mouth. They spread like wildfire. With people working together in the fields and jungle, it simply couldn't be checked. The story spread from one unit to another, and it seemed it did help to rebuild people's damaged morale. And I feel thankful that it was worth something.
The stories he told were of Minke, a young man who comes of age during Indonesia's struggle for independence from the Dutch, which started in 1949. This was the beginning of the famous 4 novels known as the Buru Quartet. Pramodia added subplots to keep fellow prisoners interested and had nostalgic descriptions of village life in Java. But the stories have a sense of immediacy.
Well, at that time I had convinced myself I was never going to get out. So I might as well resign myself to it. And seeing how many of my friends were killed there, I was pretty sure I was going to be killed myself sooner or later. It was simply through international protest I was able to survive. And for that, above all, I express my thanks to the international press.
Pramodia spent 10 years on Buru Island and left in 1979. While still imprisoned, he was eventually allowed to write the novels. And in 1980, the first of them was published, but immediately banned in Indonesia for its perceived criticism of colonial and authoritarian power. Historian Dr. Sumit Mandal wrote the introduction to one of Pramodia's early books.
Through his historical novels, Pramodia has made relevant and kept history alive for whole new generations of Indonesians. And this has been particularly important in an era when every effort has been made to revise and silence aspects of Indonesian history.
But according to Ahmed Sahal, the editor of an Indonesian literary journal in 1999, he's a controversial figure in Indonesian culture.
He used historical data, he used journalistic report to write a novel, to write a literature. The unintended consequence is that he can offer the alternative historical version from official version offered by regime.
Pramodia said that he wrote as a direct challenge to authority.
Well, yes. The choice was no coincidence. Because in a novel, every aspect can be highlighted. All the strengths and the weaknesses. Whereas in politics, you just try to bring out the strength. In the novel, both weakness and strength can be shown together. Victory and defeat together. But the way politics does things, there's too much propaganda for authority. That sort of thing is very powerful in Indonesia.
Despite censorship, the Buru Quartet gained international acclaim. For Pramodia, writing was a vital act of freedom.
Writers are spectators for all purposes. Well, that's the reason I write. When philosophy, knowledge, technology, law cannot provide the answer, literature answers, in order to maintain civilization and culture. I've always kept to that.
Jill Kersley was our guide through the archive recordings on the Indonesian writer Pramoedya Anantatur. Culture has long been at the heart of Indonesia's history. And so it was in 1983 when the world's largest Buddhist monument, the Borobudur Temple, was reopened. Jill also brings us this story of the restoration.
I often told people that during the restoration, I never even left the site. During breaks, I would sleep on the temple itself. I once had a dream on the western staircase. I saw a huge green snake wearing a crown. I didn't understand the meaning, but someone later said it was a spiritual sign. It left a deep impression on me.
That's Wedi, who worked on the restoration of the temple. It was built in the 8th and 9th centuries as a Buddhist temple, but as Islam became the predominant religion in the region, Borobudur became gradually abandoned. It was rediscovered in 1814, buried under layers of jungle and volcanic ash. Despite international interest, it wasn't until 1973 that a major restoration project started. It was a long process. Wedi was involved from the very beginning. He shared his story with BBC Indonesia. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the sounds of animals in the background.
I remember it well. As kids, we used to play around Borobudur, especially on the northern and western sides. At that time, visitors weren't allowed on the stairs because the northern side had sunk. Stones had sifted downwards by 40 to 60 centimeters. That's why the restoration was necessary, to return the temple to its original state.
Borobudur's base is 123 metres square. It's nearly 35 metres tall. Sir David Attenborough was there for a BBC TV programme in 1980.
This temple too represents the cosmic mountain. Its upper terraces symbolise the heavens where the Buddhist approaches his union with the infinite. Only in one place is his statue visible. Everywhere else, his image is hidden within the latticed walls of stone bells, stupas. And at the centre, at the summit of the cosmic mountain, all individual personality has been purged. The biggest stupa of all is solid stone. Beneath the upper celestial levels, which represent the enlightenment found by the Buddha, there are long galleries richly carved with friezes showing life as it's lived on earth.
In 1973, all of us were already permanent employees at the Borobudur Temple Restoration Project. At that time, the work was organized into teams. Each team had about 6 people, 4 laborers, 1 skilled worker, and 1 team leader. My role was to handle tasks like restoration, numbering stones, or directing the 4 laborers. The first challenge I faced was the physical labor. I had never done heavy work like lifting stones before. Let me explain. Back then, my friends and I, as laborers, had to carry stones. Some of them were huge. For example, a cornerstone could be around 1.2 meters long and 80 centimeters wide. Even with 12 people, we couldn't lift it. So we had to use a small cart to move it.
And there were other challenges.
After the restoration work was done, we had to reassemble the outer layer of the temple. That required extreme precision. If the alignment was off, the whole structure wouldn't fit properly. That kind of pressure kept me up at night. But thankfully, everything went smoothly in the end.
That was despite the unpredictable Indonesian weather.
During the rainy season, for example, once everything had been dismantled, working felt like being in a rice field. The stones and soil would mix with water, making it muddy and slippery, just like working in a paddy field. Sometimes, if a stone was too heavy, we had to ask for help from the other teams. If 4 people couldn't lift it, we'd call others to help. It was all about teamwork. There were ups and downs. The joy came from the pride I felt. I had no background in archaeology or stonework, but I was able to contribute. I feel truly proud because I started with nothing, and yet I was part of something so important.
Finally, after 10 years of work by 600 men and a project cost of approximately $6.2 million, that's over $20 million in today's money, in February 1983,
President Suharto of Indonesia headed the ceremony to mark the completion of the restoration of Borobudur Temple. The president declared that with the restoration, Indonesia was trying to preserve the proof of the grandeur of Indonesia in the past for those who live in the present. The inauguration was a big celebration. The supervising organisation UNESCO now sees Borobudur as an international training centre for tropical restoration projects.
That's a Reuters report. The temple was restored and workers were assigned to other places, but Wedi didn't want to leave.
I actually asked to become a security guard, but I wasn't allowed. So while others became security guards, I stayed to maintain the stones. I'm proud because back then the temple was in danger of collapsing. Now it's been restored. Even though I wasn't alone, there were many skilled people involved. I'm proud to have played a part.
Today, the temple restricts numbers, and visitors have to wear special slippers. They're called aparnat and are made from woven pandan leaves and sponge. They're specially designed to be gentle on the structure to help make sure Wedi's restoration work is preserved for all to see. Borobudur holds spiritual significance for Buddhists around the world, serving as a place of pilgrimage. Here's Venerable Sri Panyavaru talking to the BBC in 1999.
Every time, every moment I saw Borobudur, my faith to Buddha's teaching is increasing. When we watch the relief, we also can learn about the building in the ancient time and maybe the beauty of the art 1,200 years ago.
The temple is used as a showpiece for Indonesia. Everyone wants to visit, from heads of states to international pop stars.
French President Emmanuel Macron and President Prabowo arrived at Borobudur Temple at around 14:00 Western Indonesian time. Macron praised Borobudur Temple as a younger work, proof of Indonesia's excellence.
Meriah ya bilangnya, Meriah Carey kemudian konser di Indonesia dalam rangka Himbara Borobudur Symphony 2018.
To me, Borobudur is a source of pride, not just for me, but for the whole country. It's amazing that people in ancient times, without modern tools, could build something so magnificent. We should be proud and take care of it.
The story of the Borobudur Temple in Indonesia, including that restoration worker Wedi, was presented by Jill Kersley and produced by Daniel Raza. Incidentally, we have plenty more on Indonesia's history on our website, including the story of Sukarno, the founding father of Indonesian independence. To find that, just look for Sukarno at bbc.com/witness history or wherever you get your BBC podcasts. But right now, we can hear more about Indonesian independence and the end of Dutch rule with Annelot Hoek, a research fellow at the International Institution of Social History in Amsterdam. And when we talk a lot about Indonesian independence, the Second World War is really a central moment.
So the Indonesian struggle for independence didn't start after Sukarno proclaimed Indonesian independence on the 17th August of 1945. It was actually a result of a very long political struggle that had already started before the Second World War. And it was a response to centuries of Dutch colonialism. And when the Japanese arrived in the Dutch Indies, they were first welcomed as liberators, actually, because they gave the Indonesians education, military training, and they also promised them to get their independence.
And Dutch rule wasn't always a benign affair.
No, definitely not. It was actually a very violent affair that had already started in the 7th century with the Dutch Colonial Trading Company, the VOC, what later evolved in the Dutch Indies that was established in 1816. And one of the many things that I learned from the Balinese that I interviewed for my book, The Battle for Bali, is that there was a lot of frustration among poor and young people because they couldn't get into higher education or better jobs. Those were reserved for Europeans. And the colonial society was based on a racial hierarchy, especially in the legal system, where the Europeans were on top, the Chinese were in the middle, and Indonesians were actually at the bottom. So the colonial rule of the Dutch was not explicitly violent during Dutch society, but it was very violent in another way. People who were resisting the colonial system were basically jailed. We had a concentration camp called Bovendigel, and leaders from nationalist organizations and movements like Sukarno, Sultan Syahrir and Mohammed Hatta, they were constantly shadowed, detained and exiled to prison camps or put under detention on smaller islands. So it was actually a very violent society.
What did the struggle for independence, self-declared in 1945, what did it look like?
The Indonesian independence war is not very well known internationally, but it was actually a gruesome colonial war causing the deaths of at least 100,000 of Indonesians and probably many more. And it was a war that lasted for almost 5 years, from 45 to the end of 49. And there were a lot of nationalities involved. The British were there, Dutch, Indo-Dutch, Chinese. The British brought Gurkhas and Sikhs from Nepal and India with them. And the British actually had to retain control on behalf of the Allied forces until the Dutch returned. And the root of the conflict was the denial of the Dutch to recognize the Indonesian independence that was proclaimed by Sukarno. And this basically sparked the Indonesian revolution right away, who were defending their independence. And that was actually suppressed very severely by the Dutch, who sent nearly 200,000 troops in an effort to recolonize Indonesia.
It does seem as though the Dutch took quite a long time to recognize the anti-colonial tide of history. But when it finally came about, they recognized Indonesian independence in 1949. What did that mean for the people of Indonesia? Because it wasn't all plain sailing from then forward.
No, definitely not. Independence obviously meant a lot to Indonesia. They finally got their freedom after a very long and hard struggle. But they weren't actually freed from colonialism, such also as the life story of Pramudia Anantathur shows. The legacy of colonialism lingered on. They were in the educational and legal system, but also in landscape and language and identity, but also especially in the form of corruption and authoritarian leadership. So it's hard to talk about the legacy of colonialism and revolution without mentioning 1965 here, when the army basically took over. And Sukarno was deposed as president and Suharto came into power. Huge mass killings took place. And apart from that, also on the island of Bali, you can still see how colonial legacies linger on in the tourism industry, because the Dutch actually set up the tourism industry on Bali in the 1920s, attracting a lot of famous foreigners to the island, like Charlie Chaplin and Walt Disney. And that kind of idea of Bali as a paradise, an exotic paradise, still lives on, causing huge mass tourism up till today.
That's Annelot Hoek at the International Institution of Social History in Amsterdam. And Annelot's book, The Battle for Bali, is due to be published in the UK in the next year or so.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Still to come, as we continue looking at Indonesia's history, the discovery of a new species of human, and Jakarta's ban on the use of dancing monkeys.
Once you can start to socialize them with the other primates, they become more confident, because the healing process is not just physical, it's mental also.
But first, in an echo of Indonesia's own struggle for independence from Dutch colonial rule, the latter half of the 20th century was overshadowed by East Timor's fight for independence. And there was one moment in particular which proved pivotal. During a protest march to a cemetery, Indonesian troops opened fire on unarmed demonstrators. Here's Marco Silva.
It's November the 12th, 1991, and in the East Timorese capital, Dili, overlooking the Banda Sea, there's a sense of unease in the air.
The tension in the city and in the country was palpable. I have been to many war zones and I've never come across a situation where there was that much tension.
Max Stahl is a British filmmaker who had gone to East Timor to document the country's struggle for independence. That November day, activists were planning a march in memory of Sebastian Gomes, an 18-year-old who had been shot dead by Indonesian soldiers 2 weeks earlier. First, though, in the deeply Catholic Dili, there would be a mass.
Walking from the church to the graveyard, everybody involved knew that it was almost inevitable that it would be attacked. The only question was when.
But the young protesters were determined to make their point in a peaceful way.
They put T-shirts, which they had prepared, with all the old parties of the Timor-Leste, and at the end of the Mass, they moved out of the church and they took off their covering shirts, revealing the T-shirts with the banners. And this meant that within the space of a few minutes, suddenly you had thousands of young demonstrators walking right past military bases, police bases, and the army, the police, the Indonesians looked aghast. They had never seen anything like it. Literally, their jaws dropped.
For 16 years, Indonesian forces had occupied East Timor, but calls for independence had been violently repressed. The international community showed little interest in their situation, and the East Timorese were feeling more isolated than ever. As the march got underway, Max Stahl was filming.
The people at the front, some of them very young kids, were getting more animated, jumping up and down. There was no sense of confrontation in their minds.
The Indonesian soldiers allowed the march to continue all the way to the Santa Cruz cemetery.
There I noticed that the girl who'd been leading the demo was calling to people to put down their banners, to come and pray over the grave of Sebastian. And I was just getting my camera ready when there was a wall of sound. It felt like a long period, at least 10 seconds, of uninterrupted gunfire. Like that. And I had no idea what it was, of course, but I didn't have time to find out because everybody piled over the top of me. I was knocked to the ground. People were now pouring through the gates of the cemetery, trying to escape the bullets that were outside.
Max turned his camera back on and started filming again.
The soldiers who arrived, they got off trucks outside. They lined up. Without a word to the demonstrators, they opened fire. They fired point blank into a crowd of a couple of thousand young people. Many people died instantly. Some hit the floor and tried to pretend they were dead or they were wounded and so they couldn't move. Then the Indonesian soldiers from this group and others in plain clothes came in, some with bayonets, and started stabbing the wounded people and those who were alive on the ground.
Hiding behind a tombstone, Max kept filming as the Indonesian military moved through the cemetery.
There was a young boy, maybe 16 years old, who came with a wounded, severely wounded colleague. whom he laid down next to me in the cemetery. And he sat there, crouched there, cradling this boy, staring at the Indonesian soldiers who were not 20 meters away with automatic rifles, killing people. We were inside the cemetery and therefore we couldn't escape. So the expectation was that they would come and arrest us and then maybe kill us. But this guy, who could have escaped, he stayed there, cradling this young man who was bleeding profusely, looking straight at the Indonesian soldiers. And it turned out he didn't even know this boy. He was just not going to be intimidated, and he was not going to have his core values annihilated. That story and that image will remain with me for as long as I live.
Max knew that at some point he'd have to leave his hiding place and face the soldiers. They might arrest him, they might kill him, but he wanted to make sure that whatever they did, they didn't get hold of his footage.
They were threatening me with their guns from a distance and telling me to come, but of course I wasn't going to cooperate. But I could easily see that there was only a matter of time before they came to me. I was sitting down by a grave, a new grave, recently dug, and my first thought was an incredibly stupid one, to give a cassette to one of the guys around me. When I saw the look on their faces, I immediately revised that idea. I came up with the thought that I would wrap up a tape. I had filmed most of one, and I would bury it in the grave next to me.
Eventually, Max did get arrested, along with many of the other protesters at the cemetery. He was taken to a police station and interrogated for about 10 hours. As soon as he was released, Max knew he had to get his tapes back.
I tried to get somebody else, or one or two friends of mine, to accompany me to the cemetery. I couldn't find any volunteer. So I went on my motorbike after dark, and I did this for one very good reason. The Indonesian soldiers were superstitious, and they were scared of sleeping or going into the cemetery at night. So I thought, well, if they're scared of going into the cemetery on an ordinary night, they surely would be worried about the spirits of the dead after they've just committed a massacre. I went there after dark, dug up the tapes, and walked out again, and there was nobody there.
Max Stahl managed to smuggle his pictures out of his Timor within days of the massacre. They provided indisputable evidence of Indonesian brutality and focused international attention on the country's struggle for independence.
Marco Silva spoke to the British cameraman Max Stahl in 2015. Max died in 2021, but his documenting of the massacre at the Santa Cruz Cemetery did indeed play a part in shifting world opinion, and it was in 1999 that a UN-sponsored referendum in East Timor resulted in independence from Indonesia in 2002. Next, we're going to the streets of Jakarta, where 12 years ago the once common practice of getting monkeys to perform for the entertainment of passers-by came to an end. It marked the end of a long campaign, and for some individuals, both human and animal, it was life-changing. Here's Vicky Farncombe.
It's late 2013, and we're in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. Early in the morning, at the gate of a government building, a strange sight. Queues of people handing over macaque monkeys.
Monkeys on the motorbikes, with the monkeys in bags, with monkeys in boxes.
Dutch activist Femke den Haas is part of the team accepting these unusual offerings. But her eyes are on the lookout for one particular monkey.
I knew precisely what he looked like. I knew the scars on his face, the pigment he had under his eye, like he had a white spot. And I knew him, I could identify him.
The animal's name is Johnny, and Femke first saw him at busy traffic lights in the city centre 5 years previously. It's an image she'll never forget.
I was just waiting on the motorbike, and on my right side I heard this strange music, and then to my shock, there was an adult male macaque, a long-tailed macaque monkey, who was there with a chain around his neck and begging for money.
Johnny is wearing shorts and riding a toy wooden motorbike.
every time pulled on the chain, like having to do a new trick and going up to people on the motorbikes next to him to ask for money. And it was just horrific. I could clearly see that he was very, very scared. I made at that moment a promise to that monkey that I would rescue him no matter what, commit myself to stop this brutality.
Femke is perfectly placed to take up Johnny's cause. In 2008, she had co-founded the Jakarta Animal Aid Network, an organisation dedicated to improving the welfare of wildlife in Indonesia.
I realized that there were more dancing monkeys around Jakarta, and it became suddenly like a trend. We would see them at different traffic lights. So we investigated where these monkeys come from, and then we found out, when I say we, it's me and the team, that these monkeys were all wild caught as babies, and they were being trained at like training centers, and there would be a boss that would pay for everything, and he would then rent them out. So he would rent the monkeys out to, let's say, the handlers, who would then have a debt to the boss. So it was actually also, in a way, exploitation of the people that were involved.
Femke's team built up a case to persuade Jakarta's governor to ban the practice, known locally as topeng monyet, meaning masked monkey. This includes filming inside one of the monkey training centres.
So it would be just a house of a person, and then he would keep the monkeys in tiny dark boxes so the monkeys can never see the daylight. And then they only see the daylight when they come out to perform. The boxes they can just turn around in it. That's it. That's the space that they had. In Plumpong, this guy would have like 25 monkeys, and he would rent them out every day. And that was just one of the training centers in the time. In the time, there were many.
BBC News covers the story too.
But monkey handlers say that's not true and insist the animals are loved and well looked after.
We have never tortured monkeys. Even if we do cut their fangs, it's all we do in order not to endanger others. No, we don't torture them.
In October 2013, Jakarta's governor, Joko Widodo, bans roadside monkey performances in the city.
The plan is to get all of these little apes off the streets and into rescue homes by 2014. Officials say some 20% of the monkeys in Jakarta are carrying diseases and want to protect the city's residents. It's an ambitious plan, but one that the local government hopes will be replicated across the country.
It still gives me like shivers when I think of the moment, because, when you're thinking about something and hoping for something every day, and then that moment comes, that's big.
Understanding the complexity of the problem, the authorities offered job incentives and even cash for handlers to give up the monkeys.
The owner will get compensated for 1 million rupiah and another 1 million rupiah from the social department. So they will get 2 million rupiahs for each monkey.
That's about $178. Officials also give Femke and her team a space to build an enclosure to rehabilitate the monkeys. On the day of the amnesty, scores of macaques are handed over, including Johnny.
I took his cage and I, placed him in the clinic, and I don't know, I just felt this huge relief. And I told him, you're safe. It's just got to get better.
The rehabilitation starts with a quarantine to ensure the monkeys don't carry any diseases.
They are in an isolation cage, and this is hard for them. This is really hard for them and for us, because they are in small cages, because we have to monitor them, monitor their health, and make sure that they don't carry any dangerous disease. All of them are filled with parasites. I think it's just because they live in such disgusting conditions in small cages. They are always exposed to stress and bad diet. So after the quarantine, I always say this is where the magic happens, because this is where you can really see an individual that was really broken, stressed. You can just read in its eyes the fear and the trauma that it's been through. Once you can start to socialize them with the other primates, they become more confident, because the healing process is not just physical, it's mental also. Mentally, they've been broken. this needs to heal. And the only way to heal is by introducing them to other primates who've been through the same thing. And once they find each other, yeah, that's where the magic happens.
Johnny becomes part of a group of around 20.
Johnny's family had formed and became very stable, and they would protect each other and care for each other. They were grooming each other. They were sharing food together. And Johnny was this amazing alpha where when there was food, he would allow the weaker ones to eat with him, which was really special to watch because some alpha males are like me first and then the rest. So Johnny was more like, okay, me and the weaker ones, so the little ones, his kids that he sort of adopted, and then the rest could follow, you know. That was beautiful to watch.
But the end goal is always to release them into the wild. And after 2 years, it's time to say goodbye. Johnny and his family are transported to their new home, a protected island reserve in the west coast of Java. It's a trip that involves a 10-hour truck drive, 2.5 hours in a boat, followed by an hour's hike into the forest.
The netting was opened and Johnny and his family went high up in the tree, which is exactly what you want. And that's the most euphoric moment. That's the best moment. I mean, that just makes you feel like, oh yeah, it's all worth it. Just the difference of seeing him so broken on the street and then seeing him high up in the tree like a king, you know, like where he should be. And yeah, being where he is, it just feels good.
What did you see when you last saw him?
He was high up in the trees with the little ones, and there was one alpha female, Natalie, she was next to him, and he was grooming the little ones, and that was my last sight.
The animal rights activist Femke Den Haas was speaking to Vicky Farncombe. Finally this week, as we've been looking into events from Indonesia's past, a moment when the archipelago's ancient history was revealed. In 2003, archaeologists discovered the skeleton of a new species of human. It was nicknamed the Hobbit because the hominids in question would have been just over a metre in height, and it's thought they became extinct around 70,000 years ago. Rachel Naylor has the story.
It's the 2nd of September 2003, and archaeologists Mike Morwood and Raden Suyono are leading a dig in Liang Bua, a large cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia. They're trying to trace how ancient people travelled from mainland Asia to Australia, but so far they've not found anything of interest. That is, until they find a small human skull. Mike is excited. He estimates it's only 14,000 years old and can't wait to tell his colleague Peter Brown, a paleoanthropologist at the University of New England in Armidale in Australia.
He'd come back with a tooth, and he brought the tooth down to my laboratory to show to me and asked me what I thought about it. And I knew straight away that while it was human-like, it can't have been from a human. This tooth had an elongated crown and 3 roots fused into one. That's the kind of tooth root you find in early human ancestors, which are millions of years old. So I'm puzzled about his claims about the age of the specimen.
In the next few days, Mike's team go on to find a very small skeleton.
To me, very small could mean just an infant or a sub-adult modern human, for example. How interesting could it really be? It was just going to be a modern human skeleton. But because Mike had shown me the tooth, I was somewhat intrigued and started to take the situation a bit more seriously.
Peter agreed to go to Indonesia with Mike to take a closer look.
I was still very sceptical. I can remember having a McDonald's hamburger, as you do, before we left Sydney Airport and quizzing Mike again and again about the date. And that's basically what we're discussing and thinking and arguing about to some extent all the way to Jakarta.
On arrival, Peter headed to a lab where the bones were being kept.
The first thing I was shown was the lower jaw. And I think I knew within 2 seconds of looking that it could not have been from a modern human. It had to have been from a human relative, and it was most similar to the fossils found in Africa millions and millions of years ago.
Fortunately, Peter had brought all his usual equipment with him, like cleaning tools, glues and brushes, as well as a bag of mustard seeds.
I sort of smuggled mustard seeds through customs in Jakarta Airport. We later used those to measure the volume inside the skull to get some general idea of brain size. As I cleaned it off, the most apparent thing was it's very, very tiny, about half the size of a modern human skull, for example, and they appeared to have a brain size around about the size of an orange.
And what were you thinking then when you discovered that this was something special and something significant?
Fortunately, I'd been working on fossils in Asia for 20 years. I'd seen everything. I'd examined more than 5,000 skeletons around the globe and thousands of non-human primate skeletons as well. I knew what normal modern people were supposed to look like. I knew what fossils were supposed to look like at a particular point in time. I'd also been teaching the subject for 3 decades. So it just didn't make any sense at all. So the only thing which made sense was this clearly was a new species. What was it doing on Flores?
Meanwhile, Mike and Roden's team kept digging and finding more skeletons in Liang Bua.
The first one we found happens to be the tallest one, about 1.1 to 1.2 metres tall. We know from the shape and dimensions of the bones, they were very muscular, like probably similar levels of muscles to chimpanzees, for example. The shape of the shoulder joint is really unusual, and some people have suggested this meant that they could climb much better than we can today. Like I can still climb a tree and I'm 70, but they would have had very little trouble in climbing trees, I would have thought, because they were so strong and agile. We know that they were fairly long-lived. We can tell this from the tooth wear, for example. The first one we found was around about probably 35 to 40 years of age when they died, which was fairly similar to hunter-gatherer populations 200 years ago.
They called this new species Homo floresiensis, and Peter came up with 2 explanations for what they were doing on Flores so recently.
Wasn't happy with either of them. The first was that Homo erectus, this large-bodied human relative, had somehow got to Flores. Could not have walked, had to have used watercraft too far to swim, and through time its body size had reduced. It's called insular island dwarfing. It's where there aren't many predators on an island and there are limited food resources. Sometimes animals reduce in body size. The other possibility was that at some time in the past, an unknown, small-bodied and small-brained hominid had somehow got to Flores. But that was the only other possible alternative.
On the 27th of October 2004, Peter and the team published a paper about their findings in the science journal Nature, and Homo floresiensis was nicknamed the Hobbit.
It was a bit frustrating, frankly. I think the name Hobbit was suggested to some extent by Henry G., who was our editor at Nature.
People would love there to be yetis, leprechauns, Bigfoots, Sasquatches and hobbits and other strange little people of our imaginations.
In fact, hobbits were small-bodied and lived in caves. He thought that probably fit the situation fairly well. I really hated it with a vengeance because of all the baggage Tolkien's hobbits carry, like these sort of 18th century English country folk who are small, live in dwellings which are somewhat under the ground. They go on adventures and do all sorts of exciting things and we are associated with people who have magic and all that sort of stuff. It certainly added to the publicity for the specimen.
Could this skull change our entire view of millions of years of human evolution?
Did creatures like this really exist?
It's been hailed as the single most important discovery about human evolution for nearly 100 years.
We often read about hobbits in fantasy tales, but now scientists think they found proof that they really did exist.
Some scientists now believe that we may even have shared the planet with other weird and wonderful human species.
The end result was that the world's full of people who think they have seen either Bigfoot or a very small something or other living in their backyard. There are unfortunately very large numbers of these people, and they all tried to find him. And so for weeks and weeks and weeks, I had messages and phone calls from people who claimed to see hobbits in their backyard. I hated it, but it was too late to shut the gate.
But the hobbit's epic story didn't end there. 2 months later, the bones were taken from the lab.
Teku Yako worked at the University of Gajah Mada, and he is sometimes described as the god king of Indonesian paleoanthropology, and he probably thought he should have control of any new discoveries. He was quite possessive about the fossil materials found in Indonesia. After the team had left, Teku arrived with some people from his laboratory and without permission apparently removed everything to his own laboratory in Gajah Mada and then went out of his way to invite his friends from around the planet to come and have a look at the material. And unfortunately, in the course of the events, the materials were damaged. They can never be repaired because all the bones were quite fragile. It was a terrible saga and went on for a long, long time.
Tunku had argued that the bones were merely those of a small human with an abnormally small head, and it's believed he removed the bones to prove his own theory. They were later returned to the Centre for Archaeology in Jakarta. More than 20 years on, we're still learning about Homo floresiensis, and there is currently no evidence that modern humans lived alongside them.
There's a new archaeological team involved. They've done more excavations of the cave, and more importantly, they've refined the work on the dating of the site. We now know that Homo floresiensis wasn't around until 14,000 years ago. They were around only until around about 70,000 years ago. That's important because the movement of modern humans down through the Indonesian archipelago into Australia happened round about 50 or maybe as early 60,000 years ago. So I think they probably became extinct round about 70,000 years ago, based on the dating we now have to the site. And the only thing which could have happened was a massive volcanic eruption.
Raden Suyono and Mike Morwood died in 2011 and 2013, respectively.
It was the discovery of the century in a way. Like, it'll never be equal, mainly because the skeleton was so complete. So I said at the time, if they discovered an alien spaceship on Flores, I would have been less surprised.
Peter Brown, the Australian paleoanthropologist who helped to identify the small, ancient human ancestor which was nicknamed the Hobbit. He was speaking to Rachel Naylor. And that's it for our trawl through notable events from Indonesia's history, from ancient hominids to 20th century struggles. The History Hour will be back with more first-hand stories from the past next week. So until then, this is Max Pearson from all of us here. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
We did something that no one else had ever done.
There was such a excitement and energy about this moment.
It opened the door for everything that rapidly followed.
Witness history.
History as told by the people who were there.
I was walking in space, the first man ever to do so. I felt almost insignificant, like a tiny ant compared to the immensity of the universe.
Witness history from the BBC World Service.
Listen now. Search for Witness History wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.